All right, all right. Welcome back to the first ever post game pod for the Behind the Back podcast for the 2024 season. I am your host, Marcos Conan Negron, and I am here shortly off of an Eagles win. Yes, the Eagles beat the Packers 34-29 in Brazil in what was an extremely inconsistent back and forth matchup. And if I'm being completely honest, it felt like a game that the Eagles stole. So let's break it down. I'm going to point out things that stood out to me, whether it was good or bad, and just talk. I will give game balls to three players for this game who I thought really stood out. So to summarize what happened, it was ugly from, no, I wouldn't say start to finish. I would say the beginning and the end of this game were really ugly. And just like the Ravens-Chiefs game, penalties really played a part in this game. There was even more so in this game, and there were 17 total penalties called. I thought that really stood out because it killed the flow of the game, and honestly, it was penalties that saved the last drive for the Philadelphia Eagles that helped them secure the win. And a lot of things that stood out to me. The field. I thought that was extremely important for both teams. They were slipping and sliding. Nobody ever really seemed to have any grip. And I thought at first, I was like, okay, maybe they just need to find their footing. And nobody ever found their footing at any point in this game. And I think it led to a lot of inconsistencies. Guys were falling. Guys couldn't plant when they were running. It was causing issues. And I didn't realize it was going to have that much of an impact until the game kept going on and it kept happening. But, you know, besides that, the overall play itself, especially once both offenses got going, was really fun to watch. And Jalen and Jordan Love were really cooking, but at the same time, they were also really inconsistent. I want to point out Jalen today. I thought he had an up and down day, right? So I think when we really think about this game, the important part that stood out was the Eagles' ability to fight through adversity. And I would say, along with the field, the Packers, they also had to fight through their own adversity. It was an inconsistent game. But when I talk about the Eagles, it was about as bad as a start as you could have asked for. It made my heart sink for a second so the first drive, the Eagles come out and they're backed up in their own end zone about the 5-yard line. Third down, Jalen throws a pick. First drive of the season after all this talk about turnovers last year, throws a pick. And that hurt. And then the very next possession that the Eagles come out on, there was a miscommunication between him and Cam Jurgens, and there was a mistimed snap, and it led to a turnover off of a fumble. And, there's some arguments that could be made about this is the stuff that you would have normally been able to take care of in the preseason, right? And I completely understand that side, as there definitely was issues right out of the gate. I think one thing that really stood out was our defense's ability to prevent those turnovers from turning into anything major. It was interesting that off of the 3 total turnovers the Eagles had, the Packers only got 9 points. It was field goals every time off of it. So the defense was inconsistent, but they had a lot of really good moments in this game. And that's something I'll definitely break down on the pod because there's a lot of guys to shout out for, especially for how consistent they were. And Vic and both of our coordinators' presence were felt. The changes were made on offense. The offense looked interesting. There was a lot more motion. There was plays that the motion created space for others. Moore did a really good job of coming up with a creative game plan, and guys were open. And I really liked what I saw there. Obviously, the communication was struggling a little bit. And what I noticed personally was just a lot of Jalen Hurts. Like Jalen Hurts looked like the guy who was controlling everything on the field. It didn't look like a Cam Jurgens thing. He was calling out the protections and seeing, a lot of stuff. It was a lot of Jalen communicating. So I think that's the responsibility that they're talking about now that Kelsey's gone. That's going to be Jalen's responsibility. And I think that's something that, mentally you have to continue to grow with because that's a lot extra you're adding to a quarterback's plate. So I think despite the turnovers, and they were pretty bad turnovers, I'll admit, Jalen had some good moments in this game. So it took him a little bit of time to find that rhythm, but I commend him for finding that rhythm when things went wrong, because after those 2 turnovers, the defense held it together and this team didn't fall apart. And I think that's what really stood out when it comes to the adversity we were talking about, because this Packers team is also a really good team and they weren't able to capitalize on our mistakes. And that was one of the things last year that I really noticed, like we couldn't capitalize on mistakes. And the Eagles were finally able to create pressure and turnovers of their own as the game went on. And Jordan Love, you could tell, was cramping up, and he ultimately ended up leaving with an injury. It looked like an ankle sprain, but he was also getting his calves massaged all night. So I hope he's okay. I hope it's not too serious, and hopefully he's back in the fold soon. And I thought he also had an inconsistent game, but he had big moments, obviously. That 70-yard touchdown throw to Jaden Reed, who also had a great game. Oh, and it's funny. I think about it now, and I felt like I was burying the lead. Marcos, Saquon Barkley had 3 touchdowns in this game, and it would have been 4, but the Eagles decided not to. And when you saw that fumble on the tush push, I was freaking out. I was thinking to myself, that was God's way of telling the Eagles Saquon should have had that touchdown there for 4. But ultimately, this was the impact I was hoping Saquon was going to have on this team. And then during the course of the game, running wise, it was through the ground. It was a little bit of a struggle. He opened up with a 26-yard or a 22-yard catch off of a wheel route. Jalen threw a perfect dot to him, and that got him his first touchdown here. And then he had multiple rushing touchdowns in this game where he showed that burst and being able to explode behind this offensive line. So I was really, really happy with Saquon Barkley's debut as an Eagle. I know he was too. I know the guys were happy too. So 3 total touchdowns and over 100 yards rushing for him. And I don't know what more you can ask, especially on a day where Jalen was inconsistent. And again, Jalen made big plays. A.J. Brown did a really good job. Devontae did a great job. They kept that game going. So overall, Jalen himself, I'm giving like a C, but everyone played a really good game today. And the offensive line had its moments, but this is a good defensive line for the Green Bay Packers. That front seven did a really good job and did their best to stifle. And I think both teams were kind of in a similar position. Their run defenses were doing well, but these new running back additions did a really good job in their first game with their new teams. And again, the thing for me is when it comes down to this ugly game that Philly played, and despite all the penalties and the field issues, and ultimately, the Eagles held the time of possession and killed the game the way that they used to do back in 22 and 23. They went to their strategy and just chipped away, and they got bailed out by a couple penalties. But by the end of it, they were able to seal the deal. This was just an ugly game. For Philly, personally, I think this was an ugly game from start to finish. We had moments, but it was not consistent. But I see the potential on both the offense and the defense. I think midway through the season, the rhythm is really going to start coming through. And overall, I thought the atmosphere of the game was awesome, especially when it was just these teams driving up and down the fields. This was a good game. So yeah, now I think it's time to pivot and talk game balls. So there's a lot of guys this could have went to. This was a good game and a lot of big moments for a lot of big guys here. So the obvious one here has to be Saquon, right? 3 touchdowns in his debut. He had moments where he flashed everything that you would have hoped for. He showed he had the impact that we were really hoping for in this debut. And that's why you go out and pay him money. He's still a star. And it could have been just situational. And I think the Eagles did a really good job opening up space for him. And he really capitalized and just showed his strengths and why this is going to help this team. So Saquon will definitely get my first game ball. So my second game ball today would probably go to Zach Bond. And he's the newest addition on the linebacker position that the Eagles had in the offseason from New Orleans. And he just played so well. He was consistent. He was constantly there on the run defense. I think our linebacking play did a pretty good job this week. And Zach Bond was a huge reason for it. And he also made the game-ending play on Malik Willis. So his impact was felt all throughout the field today. And for a new guy in the system that people kind of slept on, nobody really batted an eye at the whole Zach Bond signing. It was mainly just Devin White being added to the fold, right? And he wasn't with the team this weekend. So I think Zach Bond played an excellent game. Him and Nakobe both, but I think Zach really held it down there. And this was tough. This last guy was tough because I really want to give, I guess right here what I'll do is I'll give Quinyon Mitchell his flowers because he did a really, really great job in his debut. He was all over sticky in coverage. He played really, really well. And obviously he had one rookie mistake that led to a big gain. But overall, I thought he was extremely impressive in this game. And my last game ball officially has got to go to Reed Blankenship. I think Reed has always been the kind of consistent heartbeat of this defense now since he's taken over the starting role. And I think it's crucial that we have his consistency this season too. He's always the guy that has to catch the mistakes when they reach the next level, and he always finishes the job. And he came up with the team's only turnover today, a clutch interception against Jordan Love, and in the third quarter, and that really turned the tide for us because we were trying to find our rhythm again, and that allowed us to make up for all the mistakes that we were dealing with at that time. So, Reed Blankenship, shout out, you get the third one. You came up big for this team. And again, there was a lot of great performances tonight. And there's a lot to unbox and a lot to unpack because there's a ton of work in progress. But I think if I had any final thoughts here, 34-29, that was pretty close. I had 34-31. I was pretty happy about that too. I knew it was going to be a high scoring game. I didn't anticipate the penalties and the ugliness of it, of course. But one thing I want to take away, I think final thoughts is, I think there's going to be a lot of crushing Jalen. I think Jalen had a lot of great moments, but he made some boneheaded mistakes today. And I think one thing to consider is this is an entirely new situation for him. Him and Cam Jurgens, this was their first game together. There's going to be miscommunications there. I kind of agree with the whole, maybe they should have got preseason reps, but it also makes me feel better in a weird way that despite that, they were still able to come through in the drive that mattered most, and Jalen played clean. And he made big plays and extended plays with his legs when it mattered the most. And I think that's something with Jalen that they talked about Jordan Love in the game. They reference his cool, calm collectedness, never getting rattled. I also think that despite Jalen's mistake, nothing's ever really shakes him. He always just comes out and does what he can on the next drive. And I think that's something that can't be understated with the leadership of Jalen Hurts. And I think he's only going to get better the more he gets a handle on these responsibilities. So I think, it was an inconsistent, ugly game, and he almost cost us the game at times. But he pulled it together when it mattered the most. And despite all that, we did win in spite of him today. But I also think that this was a good growing lesson for him and the team, and they're only going to get better from here. So fly, Eagles, fly. We got to win. And again, 1-0 is better than being 0-1 and wondering what these questions are going to be. The Packers are going to be in an interesting spot depending on the severity of Jordan Love's injury. So that's really unfortunate, and that sucks. But on a personal level, the Eagles got the win. Their offense had potential. Their defense had potential. This team has potential. So if we can just clean some things up, stop playing sloppy, we're going to be just fine. And I think the hype is there with Saquon. I think he showed out. This was just a good overall game. And I think that despite the ugly win, we won ugly this time. And I think there's just potential to clean this up and get this right. But I'm happy. And I hope I hope when Ben does his, he's in the same position as I am, where we're talking about a win. And, again, I didn't feel personally that the Eagles deserved this win, but that's how it goes. We ended up with the luck at the end, and I'll take it. So, we got an extra time. We got some extra time to rest before playing the Falcons in week 2. So we'll see what's next. But this was the first post-game pod of the season, first of many. So, this is going to be fun to kind of break things down as we go. And then Ben and I will definitely have some takes to fire off when we get to the pod together this week. So I am Marcos Conan Negron. If you guys want, hit us up at behindthebackpod13@gmail.com. And we have all of our links in our description below, but you can hit us up on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, X, all that fun jazz. YouTube listeners, please like and subscribe this video. Leave any comments on what you thought the game was. If you had any, issues with the reffing, or if you thought the field was crazy, or if you think the Eagles snuck away with this one, or, whatever take you have to offer. So this was a lot of fun. We'll talk to you guys on the pod. Peace.